Ready and rearing. Okay. Okay, do you need a chair? Okay. All right, let's do this. There'll be more chairs the next time you guys come in here. She's here, right? Did she put her stuff there? Yes, okay. Just can't see her. All right, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Let's have attention, please. All quiet, please. Thank you. Go ahead, turn your notes to the Rwanda section. We're going to be finishing out the Rwanda section when you guys come back on Wednesday. It's actually Wednesday after the break. For my class, I don't know what you have on your A day, but first thing in the morning, be on time, we'll be in here, first period on a B day, Wednesdays and Fridays when we'll go, 90 minutes, boom, 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 and we'll be going full tilt, right? We're going to go from genocide of Rwanda to, genocide ultimately in the Balkans. We include a little bit of 20th century war as far as like the wars in the Balkans with the Bosnian War. That's one of the wars that's identified as a paper 2 topic with all those other 20th century wars that you've done. And then the paper 1 component, which is Kosovo. For those of you guys, I know some of you guys are very familiar because you've anticipated like exactly how this is all going to play out. The first exam you do for IB is paper 1. Wow, that's easy to remember. And paper 1 has not been changed, actually. It's the one thing that hasn't, which is just fine because you guys are going to be well prepared for it. Paper 1 is an hour, and it will either be on Rwanda or Kosovo. So you're going to be covering both, and they're going to be fresh in your memories. Mostly, and we will do training in here to make sure you know how to do that. There's a lot of like kind of OPVL and just straightforward recognition. You're actually going to be pleased that it's not too crazy hard to do. There's one sort of tucked in within that hour is like about a 20-minute or so small essay sort of type thing, and some of it is analyzing the documents that you are given, and then you weave into that the knowledge that you gained here in this class. Okay? Does that make sense? So an understanding of everything, and I think you guys are going to have, if you haven't already, a really good understanding of the situation with Rwanda, and then we'll get that with Kosovo right after the break. Jack, you got a question?
We don't know, like, they just take one of those two.
Exactly. Yep. And I will give you guys samples, basically the questions that they've done in the past, so you'll be very familiar, and we'll do a practice paper 1, we'll do a training, we'll do a practice paper 1, and you'll see how very doable it is. I mean, it's really actually very nice, and students have, it's given how much preparation you have to be ready for paper 2 and paper 3 questions and so forth, it's a relatively small amount that goes into the paper 1. And frankly, if you do a really good job on OPVL stuff and on your IA, which you guys have already done, and that's all in the bag, still waiting for a couple things to be emailed to Ms. Saleh, but I know you didn't, you're in really good position for the paper 1. So we're going to be moving on from that in most of April to really quick review, and most of the review is going to be on your own, and then coming in and doing essays in class, and a lot of peer review on that. So we're going to get you calibrated to be like essay writing fiends, which is good that we're going back into the 90-minute session, because then we can take a chunk of that to write the essay, about 45, 50 minutes each, and then have some time for the peer review as well as doing, topic, review kind of things. Yep. I'll get all that to you. It's in all the various different things. Paper 1, like I say, it's either going to be Rwanda or Kosovo. Okay? Unless, and you're welcome to do this, because if you feel pretty good about what we did in the 10th grade on civil rights, it could be, you can look at that question, and if they have a civil rights for the United States, you might be comfortable doing it on that. I mean, go for it. Although if it's on apartheid South Africa, maybe you're not as comfortable with that one, but you should be fine on doing whichever it is, the Kosovo or Rwanda one. Okay? Other questions? All right, you ready to dive back into the material? Okay, good. Let's pick up where we were. Oh, No, we did that one. Been there, done that. We're looking at, and we're going, the nice thing about this unit is it actually kind of goes almost sequentially. Causes of conflicts, we've done that. Course and intervention, we've done that. Now we're on to the last part, impact, okay? As I mentioned to you before, 10% of the population dead, 75% of them were the Tutsis. Massive, massive refugee crisis. By the end of this situation, most of the refugees are going to be Hutu, okay? And you're going to see, this is actually pretty good because this is from 1994. You're going to see massive refugee camps established primarily in Zaire. Later we'll call it the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Do you see that? And this is very helpful because it shows you the number of people in each of the different camps. Notice, for example, what happened? Jacob, what happened to the refugee camps in Uganda? Can someone tell me what happened to the refugee camps, Jackson?
Well, they were all like 50, and they all just kind of migrated into this.
Exactly.
Rwanda again.
Yeah.
They kicked out Tutsis.
Exactly, because they kicked out the Hutu power folks who were in charge of the government there. So now they've got a place to return to. Some of them had been living in Uganda in those camps for quite some time. And of course, remember, it's important to note this because you think a refugee camp is just a bunch of refugees, but make sure you write this down. And the RPF knows this. Refugee camps can also all have many people within their midst who are soldiers. And in fact, if you are a soldier who is escaping, an Interahamwe person who is escaping, you may end up in one or many of these refugee camps. Notice most of them are going to be in Zaire. You do have some in Tanzania as well, not as many in Burundi. And we've got, as far as the refugees, before the genocide, there were about 500,000. They were mostly Tutsis, and they were located predominantly in Uganda. After the genocide, by the end of 1994, about that 500,000 is like, whoa, well, now we can move into Rwanda again. So how many refugees are we talking about? Over 2 million. Over 2 million refugees, Rwandan refugees, mostly Hutus, mostly in Zaire. There's going to be some that will be in refugee camps within Rwanda, but we'll talk about some of the distinct situations that take place there. We already talked about the social impact as far as the role of women. We'll come back to that. All right, now, who is, and of course, as I mentioned, in these refugee camps, you have Hutus, and some of them are armed. They're taking their weapons in there. I mean, if you have in your mind an idea of a refugee camp as being just sort of like a bunch of people standing in line waiting around for like handouts and so forth, not necessarily. I mean, you're like, oh, yay, we got away. Oh, my gosh, look who's running the show. This is going to be an issue. You're going to have a number of armed Hutus within some of the refugee camps. Yes?
Okay, I just want to clarify. You're talking about the Ugandan refugee camps, and you said before the genocide there was like 500,000.
Those are going to be mostly Tutsis.
Okay, and then after there were 2 million, and that was mostly the Tutsis.
Yeah, and what you're looking at right here is the afterwards. This would be like by the end of December, and that is mostly Hutu. Okay? And you can understand why that's the case, right? Yeah, because who's in charge of Rwanda by the end of all this craziness? Yeah, okay, the RPF. Okay? Write this down. The UNHCR. You're like, UNHCR. Oh my gosh, we read another acronym. United Nations High Commission on Refugees. The UNHCR. They are going to play a role, they're going to play a considerable role in trying to organize refugee camps. In fact, you actually had references to that, and at the very end of the movie, that was a UN refugee camp that they were being taken to, and then, of course, they got on buses and got the heck out of there, at least as portrayed in the movie. The United Nations High Commission on Refugee trying to run these camps, they're obviously in a very difficult position to manage that with the resources that they have there. And in addition to that, they're trying to identify in the refugee camps people who should be set aside for, let me think about this, criminal prosecution? You think? Yeah, it's kind of like after World War II. Did Nazis go walking around in their uniforms? Or do they try to hide and pretend that they were like a German refugee and make their way the heck out of the country? Yeah, so there's going to be plenty of folks that are going to be looking for. How many people did we say were involved in the killing? Just a few thousand? Really? That many people? That's crazy. What kind of weapons were they using? I thought the military was the only one that had guns. Oh, really? How many people died from machetes?
200,000.
Wow, okay. There you go. Well, you got that figured out. Okay? The conditions in the camps were very, very difficult. Write this down. Cholera, killing tens of thousands of people. How do you get cholera? Anybody know that? Yeah, bad water. Yeah, it's kind of like if you ever played the one of the original like historical like computer games, the Oregon Trail. Have you ever played that? Yeah, okay, there we go. Yeah, you got cholera. You're dead. Boom. Yeah. It looked like it was safe. Anyway, I'm thirsty. And of course, you've got another complicating situation here. The government of Zaire is corrupt. It's headed by Mobutu Sese Seko. The last time we ran into Mobutu Sese Seko, I pointed out that at the end of that crazy Congo war and so forth, the United States was like, hey, this guy is in charge now, and we like him. Raise your hand if you can tell me. Why would we like Mobutu Sese Seko? He allows us to buy plenty of critical mineral resources that we need for our military and other kinds of things. Yeah, Mobutu Sese Seko. And yeah, he's got all kinds of problems in his country of Zaire, and now they've got massive refugee camps there on the borders. Oh, by the way, yes, go ahead. Not created yet. Yep. Yeah. Z-A-I-R-E. I think, did I include that one in there? It's okay. No, that's all right. And on my map, I don't think I identified that very well on the map, huh? Sorry. Z-A-I-R-E. That was easier for me to remember when it was that way, because it was like, well, then there's just one Congo, although that was the previous Belgian Congo. Yes?
You have Mobutu Sese Seko on this?
I will put his image on there in just a moment. Okay? One thing I did want to point out, actually, here we go. Mobutu Sese Seko. There you go. Yeah, sorry. Shaking hands with Reagan as a reminder to you that in the heart of the Cold War, the latter stages of the Cold War, he was on our side because he made sure that we got the kinds of minerals that we needed. And he ultimately will be overthrown, corrupt, and so forth. We'll get into some of the details of how that took place. But yeah, Mobutu Sese Seko. Oh, by the way, if you're in a refugee camp, I mean, life is difficult. Your fellow Hutus are killers, and they've got weapons, and they're bullies, and they're trying to hide out, and they will kill you if you try to point out that they're some of the bad guys and so forth. And there's cholera, there's death, and so forth. What do you want to do? You want to get out. Just as a side to point out, some people, not a lot, but some people managed to make their way to Boise, Idaho. Let me just say this about Boise, Idaho, Twin Falls, Idaho, and so forth. Okay? If you have, of all places, yeah, it's kind of like, what were you doing during freshman year? Well, you guys were, I guess, in here studying, history or whatever kinds of things and so forth. I was over at Jefferson Elementary, I mentioned that before, in the Boise School District, working as a paraprofessional. And that population at that particular school has a high percentage of students who are refugees. And at that time, there were actually quite a few who were still very new to the country, learning the language English. You can make a note of this just as an aside, because this is very important. This is sort of like on you guys, right? Because you guys are U.S. citizens. What do you do when you see problems in the world that result in a lot of people who are innocent refugees who go from war-torn situations to having some sanctuary in a refugee camp? And of course, sometimes you could be in a refugee camp for years and years and years. There's still people in Palestinian refugee camps from wars that took place in the 1940s and 50s. So, what do you do about it? I mean, it's an important question. What do you do about it? When you hear some of you guys are like, 2 million refugees, and you're like, let's add that to the number of refugees and people in different parts of the world. Let me see, what would be like perhaps one location that if they could and were invited and had the supports and resources necessary to like live there, where would they like to go? Yeah. Does it have the same like climate? Not necessarily. I remember seeing some of those kids and they're like, man, they look cold. I don't think they're quite used to the Idaho winters because, yeah, they don't really have a thing called winter when you're talking about the equator, you know. Cultural things and so forth. Not so many people in this, in places like Idaho speak some of the same languages that they did there. The cultural opportunities, food, language, and so forth. It's all so different, and yet, why America? Safe, opportunity. I mean, look back and study your family's histories and so forth. Why did you come to America? And some of you guys are like, my entire 100% ancestry has been in America. I don't see any hands there. Really? No. I don't think so. Okay. So, but here's the deal. Make a note of this. Who determines how many refugees can come into this country? First, the United States government. The first line is the United States government, okay? So you first have to have a United States government that is willing to do this. Has the United States government been willing to do this with respect to refugees? This is as opposed to like over 100 years ago when our country's like, we need more white people from Europe to settle, conquer the continent so that we can like go all over the place. And we brought in all kinds of folks. How many of you guys have ancestry that came in like at least 100 years ago or so? Yeah, I mean, there you go, okay? Yeah, but this is an interesting thing because like after the Vietnam War, we're like, oh, we feel really bad about that. We're open to having quite a few Vietnamese refugees, Cambodian refugees, Cuban refugees after the communists took over Cuba and so forth. I mean, this situation is not all of our making except for, I don't know, maybe if we'd done a little bit more, we could have like tamped it down. There wouldn't have been such a refugee crisis. I don't know. But how many can we take? We do take some, and we try and provide the best situation for it. Okay? And that's always a challenge. Do we just take a bunch of kids and go, here's a bunch of unaccompanied kids? No, that's not going to work out very well. How about just like single young males? Not necessarily. And in fact, we get a little nervous about that depending on what part of the world they're coming from. Because if you're a single young male who is a refugee from Syria, you're going to get a lot of scrutiny from the United States government as to like what's going on. So the ones we tend to give preference for, they have to be like refugees going through very difficult situations, and there's plenty coming from that area in Africa, also in the Syrian Iraqi area, over in Myanmar and so forth. There is a repressed group of population that has, that's just kind of like what's going on right there. And mostly we tend to let families. And you got to go through a lot of screening and all kinds of various different checks and so forth. And then as far as identifying where would be the best places in this country for resettlement, so you can have training, some initial support, some housing support, some language and educational support, Idaho is right up there. And some people are like, well, why not? What's San Francisco? I mean, those people will be very willing and so forth. Raise your hand if you can tell me, why is San Francisco maybe not as good of a place for refugee relocation as opposed to like Boise, Idaho? That's not quite what I'm getting to. Prices, exactly. Cost of living is really, really high. And that's actually starting to become an issue for the Boise area. But cost of living issues, because when you start out new in a country, you're going to, even if you have background and so forth and various different things, your job entry opportunities are probably mostly low paying. Okay? So it was weird. At Jefferson Elementary, it was sad if a kid had to move and go to another school, but in a way it was happy, because the reason they were at Jefferson is because they were staying in subsidized housing right nearby. But if their families were having some success and getting jobs and having an opportunity to get an apartment in another part of the Ada County, that was good. That was because they were becoming acclimated and beginning to have success as Americans and neighbors and all kinds of stuff like that. So anyway, this is going on right here. So it was fascinating to me because with my understanding of all the craziness that goes on there, I could actually have informed conversations with some of the people, including one of the paraprofessionals who was from there. He was a teacher, and he was now being a teacher and a interpreter at Jefferson, because not too many people spoke any of the languages that were spoken by those folks. Anyway, so I think that's a really cool thing. So, woohoo! Boise, Idaho, and Ada County, and Twin Falls. Although the number did go down over the last 4 years. There was concern that maybe the country was taking on too many, so those numbers were dropped. I would just say this. I like it when it's all organized. I don't like just a whole bunch of people showing up at the border, because that tends to not work out so well. Yeah, if you go like, we're open, that doesn't necessarily work out as well. Okay? So it'll be interesting to see if more refugees are organized and allowed for to come into Ada County, because it went down to quite a bit of a trickle over the last 4 years. It was quite a bit in the early years of the 21st century. Okay? Anyway, that being aside, let's get back to the notes here. One particular camp that had serious issues was Camp Cabeno. Write this down. Camp Cabeno, actually located just inside of Rwanda. Okay, this goes back into your notes. In April of 1995, the Rwandan government closed the camp with allegations and so forth that there were too many Hutu militia who were in the camp there. So when you close a refugee camp inside your country, does it necessarily have to look like this? And I don't know if you can tell, but there's some garbage bags and so forth there, but there's also dead people. The new Rwandan army, the RPF, which is pretty much they transitioned from RPF into the new Rwandan army, they said that there was just about maybe 300 people that were killed when the camp was closed. The United Nations estimated it was probably closer to 2,000. What was the cause? Trampling, when you're trying to get away from folks and so forth. Maybe some machetes. Some allegations that there was Hutu militia who were in there doing some of the killing and so forth. Other allegations going, yeah, right, and Antifa was a part of it too. Just kidding. It's like, so who is responsible for that particular thing? It's like, seriously? Yeah, question. Yeah, so going back to this map, so this one actually kind of gives you a sense of like, well, there weren't too many camps located actually in Rwanda. And I think probably more accurate if this was December 1994, they probably would have had actually in there one of those camps, including, in particular, this one right here, Camp Cabeno. Okay? You get a little bit of a sense here that if there is bad action on the part of the Tutsi in the aftermath, it's not necessarily going to get the same full attention as maybe some of the Hutu extreme behavior. Okay? Question? Depending on who you talk to. The RPF says just about 300. The United Nations says probably closer to 2,000. Like, this one's not as hard actually to figure. It's kind of like it's contained within a camp. I mean, okay, build a perimeter. All right, now, everyone, take out your calculators as we come across dead bodies. Identify how many dead bodies there are. Okay. Justice and reconciliation. Write this down. This is a very important component as we look on here. Justice and reconciliation. You ready? This is going to be a really tough call. The first problem is, by the end of all the killing, the court system, you writing this down? Because if you got your arms close together, you're not writing stuff down, because I can tell. The court system is really not very well positioned to handle the kind of cases that are going to be coming up here. I mean, there were 6 judges and 10 lawyers left in the Rwandan population after all the killing had taken place. 10. And 6 judges. That's in the regular Rwandan judicial system. Can they handle the number of cases that are going to be coming up? No. 6 judges and 10 lawyers. They're going to need some help. They're going to need some additional resources, and I'll tell you exactly how this is going to play out. We're going to get to that. We're going to get to that. Okay. We'll spell it all out for you. Identifying the problem. You can see that it's like they got a lot of justice to do here in this here country, but they don't have a lot of resources initially. And you've got the additional problem, you got the killers and the victims living side by side. Because, I mean, some of the Hutus, it's like they never were refugees. And some of the Tutsis who had escaped, and then they go back to their homes, and they're like, oh, yeah, my neighbor down there did it. Oh, my God. It's going to be hard. Is the United Nations going to help? Yes. Here we go. Write it down. Another acronym. ICTR, created by the United Nations, stands for International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda. So the United Nations is going to take some money and resources and try and help out so that there's going to be some justice done in Rwanda. Let's see how this works. This is all very new, okay? This is all very new. What kind of template did they have to look at? Let me see. Nuremberg after World War II. All right, so they got a handful of the Nazis and so forth and did that. Here, you've got 130,000 people in prison awaiting trial. So it's a little bit more than just, several rows of Nazis at the Nuremberg trials. Within 4 years, 1998, between the ICTR and the Rwandan justice system, which obviously didn't have very many resources there, they had handled 1,200. Okay, so that's a backlog. So Rwanda sets up a new special criminal system called Gacaca. It looks like Gakaka, but it's pronounced Gacaca. Basically what it is a community justice system. Community justice system. And during a 10-year span between the years of 2002 and 2012, they will handle 2 million cases. And if you're like, wait a minute, 2 million cases, that's larger than the number of people in prison. Well, I'll tell you what, some of those people in prison awaiting trial had more than one case pending against them. Do you understand that? You get that? Okay. I mean, it's like how many, Ted Bundy, how many cases did he have? One guy, a lot of cases. Yeah. The Rwandans, the total amount that was spent was $40 million handling 2 million cases, which is actually pretty budget conscious. If you look at this image, I think you can get a little bit of a sense. You've got somebody standing up here, you've got local community people, you've got witnesses coming in, you've got the community sitting around watching and so forth. This is going on throughout the country. One of the things that's interesting that is available to the Gacaca justice system is the death penalty. 22 will be executed. 22 will be executed. But what you're thinking about is like 22 out of, how many was it? Hundreds of thousands of people who were involved in like killing folks. It's going to be somewhat reminiscent of some things that actually take place in South Africa. We haven't gotten into that, but there, in the 1990s there was a transition between white minority rule to everyone gets to vote, and don't be surprised that Nelson Mandela comes in with a black majority rule and cabinet and so forth. And one of the things they look at doing is, what about all of the bad stuff that happened prior to? And his tack is going to be a little bit like what goes on here. We want to hear about it. We want this to come out. We're not just going to keep a tight wrap on it. But what we're looking for is reconciliation. The worst offenders are going to be punished with prison or even execution. But some of the other ones, maybe not. Maybe we just want to hear it. Maybe we just want an opportunity for somebody to stand in there and go, you know, when you had the gun pointed at you and you had the knife and you killed this neighbor of ours, you did wrong. Now you're like, well, I can be empathetic to the person who had the gun pointed at their knife. What would you do if somebody had a gun pointed at your head? And they're thrusting a machete into you and saying, take this and kill that person. And we saw in the movie that Paul Rusesabagina, at least as portrayed in that movie, could talk his way out of all kinds of stuff. He goes, what could I do to not kill these people. And he's like pulling out money and doing all kinds of various different things and so forth. I mean, he's a quick thinker. Could you do that? Or would you be like, shoot me first, you know? So anyway, that's one of the interesting things of the gacaca justice system. There is going to be a lot of forgiveness, but on the most egregious cases, they will actually institute the death penalty. The United Nations, or excuse me, the ICTR, they handle, how many cases do they have altogether? 71 ultimate convictions. So they're going to handle the most egregious ones, although, interestingly enough, if your case gets taken up by the ICTR, there is one potential consequence that is not on the table. You know what that is? The death penalty, exactly. Yeah, the death penalty. There's not that many countries in the world that have the death penalty. United States, China, Iran, Saudi Arabia, most of the European countries and so forth that are supporting this and so forth, they're like, no. So some of the bad guys you're going to be seeing here are going to be get like life in prison. Okay, there and then there. Yeah.
Okay. So, you said before that the ICTR plus the old court systems are only handled 1,200 cases
By 1998.
by 1998.
Yeah.
And the ICTR only has 71 convictions.
Ultimately.
So the court system is doing.
So who did most of the work?
Yeah. Okay.
These guys, the local Rwandans, with financial help from outside, but, I mean, justice on the cheap. Do they have like a big fancy room here with like water bottles for everybody involved and so forth? No, let's get a grassy field, let's get some tables, and let's get this thing done. Actually, here, write this number down. The ICTR for your 71 convictions, $1.7 billion. It's like, yeah. It's like, how much money does it take to feed people? Well, in America and Europe, it takes a lot more money to feed people because you've got all the infrastructure costs and so forth and so on and so forth. Yeah. What's that? $40 million. $40 million. The maximum penalty, as I mentioned, for an ICTR would be life in prison. Okay? Life in prison. Oh, and by the way, just in case you're wondering, the RPF is not really interested in prosecuting any Tutsis who are alleged to have committed war crimes. Okay? I mean, it's like how many Americans, British, Soviet people were tried at the Nuremberg trials after World War II? I don't think anybody. If you win, you might get a pass. It's not always the case. We'll keep an eye on that when we do a comparison at the situation in Kosovo. We'll see there's actually going to be some on the winning side that ultimately are tried, but not as many.
Okay, wait, so you're telling me that they weren't allowed to because they would be taking sides, but they didn't convict anyone?
This is after, okay?
I know, but like,
They're taking sides now.
okay, yeah.
And so the United Nations, through the ICTR, is setting up a criminal tribunal system so that facts can be brought out and sentences can be carried out. So some of the most well-known ones are going to be ICTR folks. Okay, like for example, write this guy's name. Jean Kambanda, former prime minister. Okay, ICTR is going to have their way with him, and he is going to get the maximum penalty that the ICTR can give, which is what? Life in prison, yeah. You remember Pauline? I remember the first time I did this, I had a student named Pauline. He's a very nice student. And she's like, oh my gosh, is there seriously somebody named Pauline? Remember what Pauline did? Yeah, gathered girls so they could be like sex slaves and so forth. She got life in prison, okay? The former Minister of Women's Affairs. Also, the head of the RTLM, Hate Radio, and the editor of the Kangura. So news media, you just get your Twitter account taken away. If you are integrally connected to this kind of violence and so forth, there will be consequences. The head of Kangura and the head of RTLM are going to be equally punished with prison sentences. I didn't have the names. Do you think you got enough names already in this unit? Yeah, you're like, you can look those names up if you want to on your side. Yeah, trust me, when we get to this unit, we're going to have all kinds of Eastern European names as well as African names. It should keep you guys pretty busy. Okay? Questions? Okay? Political change. Do you recognize one of these guys? They're both pretty happy here. Yeah, this one right here, Pasteur Bizimunga. No. Good question. You recognize that name. He is not. Okay? I'm going to clear this up with you. Here is, of course, Paul Kagame, head of the RPF. He was the big winner. Okay? Here's the deal. Kagame, of course, wins. The Tutsis are in charge. Okay? They're in charge of the media, the banks, the courts, the security systems, and so forth. But, of course, what they want to do, because they're still looking around their country and they're still, 10%, maybe a little bit less than 10% after all of this has been done. Although, with refugees moving off and away, the Hutus, that kind of tends to balance things out. They want a unity government. Write this down. They want a unity government. They want to have a situation where people will buy into the new government and not look for an opportunity to seek vengeance in the future. So this guy right here, the president, Bizimunga, is Hutu. The vice president, Paul Kagame, is Tutsi, of course. You know that already. So, they're having a nice conversation and so forth. Who's more powerful? What do you think, Frank? Who's more powerful there? The guy on the right? You're right. Wait a minute, but he's vice president. Yeah, exactly. He's the power behind the throne. It's kind of like, remember when Mao didn't have to have a title? As long as Mao's alive, he's in charge. Paul Kagame still has that integral connection and role within the military and so forth. And so they have a Hutu as the president to help create this sense of unity and so forth. Okay? And were there Hutus in the previous, before the genocide, that were not about seeking vengeance and killing Tutsis and so forth? Yeah. I mean, what happened to them? Yeah, they got killed. Yeah, I mean, they were targeted right away as the so-called moderate Hutus. Okay? As it turns out, Bizimunga, because this happens sometimes, corruption, he was forced to resign in the year 2000 because of corruption, and ended up in prison for 15 years. But that's just corruption. That's good old-fashioned corruption. I don't know, paying off things and doing things that just are not right. He wants to know lots of details. That's good. You can find out, I'm sure. Usually it's like, money's not going where it's supposed to be going. 15 years, yeah. Okay? Not to be misidentified with, I'm glad you remember this. Put this guy's name here. From the movie, General Bizimunga, which if you look at the movie, actually, the way the story was told, it was sort of streamlined a bit because Paul Rusesabagina is actually working with a lot of different military types, but they kind of all incorporated that into the one military guy, and he was a real person, General Bizimunga. Does he have some responsibility? If we've just watched the movie, you're like, oh, he's not that bad. I mean, As it turns out, he is going to face responsibility. Although, it's going to take some time. He had escaped to the west. He did not want to be captured. He escaped. He was in Angola, where he was arrested in 2002. And ultimately tried and convicted for 30 years. General Bizimunga did not escape justice. Yeah, if you're like, well, I don't think he did that bad because I watched the movie. Hello, does the movie give you the entire scope of everything that took place? No. He's a general. And was the military involved in the execution of lots of Tutsis? Heck yeah. Yeah. I mean, you get a little bit of a sense that they're not quite as rabid as, say, the Interahamwe. And yet, they were going around killing people left, right, and center. You couldn't do that kind of extent of genocide with just the militia. Okay? Also, this guy, George Rutaganda. Remember, he was the one that Paul Rusesabagina was buying stuff from, for the hotel. He was a key Interahamwe leader in the region, and he is also going to be convicted and sent to prison. Okay? Economic recovery, you can write this down. There is going to be some economic recovery after the genocide. Western countries feeling kind of guilty. Imagine that. about the role that they had played or not played during the time period. The United States is going to fork over $4 billion in economic assistance between the years of 1995 and 2000. $4 billion to help with Rwandan rehabilitation and so forth. Okay, so that's $4 billion. It's a little bit of money. Oh, yeah. You're like, let me see, what was the value of the latest COVID relief bill? Yeah, but it's a bigger country. It's the United States of America. It takes a lot more money to spread things out in the United States of America. Okay? Meanwhile, let's have some more sadness, disaster, and so forth. The Congo. Mobutu Sese Seko, the leader of Zaire, he's not doing much to curb the Hutu militia on the border of, let's go back to this. This is probably a better image to look at. So Mobutu's not doing much to curb the violence and Hutu militia. And of course, Kagame over in Rwanda is going, I know where this can lead, because that's how I came to power. We were operating without restraint in Uganda, and we were ultimately able to go back into Rwanda. And so what does the RPF? The RPF is very concerned that you're going to get border attacks coming across. Mobutu is having difficulties of his own maintaining control of his country because he's corrupt and he's losing support throughout his country. So he comes up with a really interesting idea. He gives weapons to the Hutus in the refugee camps. Yeah, to help him out. I mean, when you're looking for somebody to help you out, let's go with these guys. I mean, they know how to swing, machetes and fire weapons and so forth. And so he's like, let's get those guys to be part of our effort. Well, what do you suppose the RPF, the new Rwandan government's going to do when they see that taking place? They're going to attack. Write it down. They're going to attack. So Rwanda joins the anti-Mobutu forces, kicking off what is referred to as, in 1996, the First Congo War, as opposed to the Second Congo War. The First Congo War, you're like, oh my gosh, did this stuff get even... Yes, it's going to get bigger exponentially. Most of the people that have settled as refugees in the Boise area and other parts of the United States and other parts of the world are refugees, not just from the Rwandan thing, but mostly refugees from the conflict going on in Congo, which is a longer-term conflict. Congo War, yep. So what does the RPF do? They go charging back into, they go into Zaire, okay? And they're going to be breaking up refugee camps and so forth in that area. And of course, then you've got Hutu who are like, what the heck, where should we go? By that time, many of the Hutus are starting to return to Rwanda, get away from the refugee camps, they're not safe, hope that they can make their way back into Rwanda and achieve some sort of reconciliation in their old neighborhoods. Some of them are. No, I know. It's like, hey, you guys are all refugees. I'm from Mobutu. I'm on an employment search. You look like a nice young man who can join the Mobutu forces. Can we hire you? Yeah, and the rest of you guys are looking like, glad that guy's got here. I'm thinking maybe my best chances are heading the other direction. Okay? Second Congo War. Let me do this one real quick. Oh, by the way, Mobutu is defeated in the First Congo War. By May of 1997, Mobutu is defeated, and they rename it, in 1997, the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Woo! We have just a tiny bit more that we'll do right afterwards, the Second Congo War, and then we'll talk about some of the heroes from Switzerland, from the United States, and of course, check it out here. Who's giving Paul Rusesabagina? Is that Billy Boy? Oh my gosh! It's George W. Bush! Oh my gosh, I quit right now, you guys. He's been on your wall. That's George W. Bush! George W. Bush. And we'll talk about this guy. All right. Okay, we almost got to the very, very end. Are you lost?